Today, I'm going to be sharing a cautionary tale about gauge and why it is so important in achieving a fit that you like. So, I am wearing what looks like a finished sweater, but it is actually not finished. It is very much in progress here. This is Quotidian Tee. It is a versatile t-shirt pattern that has a bunch of options. I'm currently knitting the long sleeve option. I have knit this several times before, so I know what I'm expecting out of it, and I'm currently not getting it at least on one of these sleeves here. So you may already be able to see this just looking at me here, but these sleeve caps have a very different look between them. This one looks relatively clean and smooth, and this one kind of looks a little puffy. And that's because I do not have the same gauge between these two sleeve caps, and that is entirely driving the fit differences that you're seeing here. So to back up a little bit, I cast this project on several years ago, and it's kind of been through several stages of work. Not only are we dealing with the variable of gauge right now, I'm also dealing with a little bit of the variable of gauge now versus gauge several years ago. So I cast this on at the end of 2022 when I wanted to have an easy stockinette project when I brought my daughter home from the hospital. So that year I got through most of the body, kind of set it away once the weather warmed up again. The following year I worked the upper body and started doing the neckline trim, then set it away again once the weather warmed up. So here we are in the third winter that I've been working on this. We are now working on these sleeves. For a little bit of insight onto the project construction, this is worked in the round for the body, the upper body is worked flat, and then the sleeve caps are worked with a seamless set-in method. So you pick up stitches around the armhole, you work some short rows to work the sleeve cap, and then you're working in the round for the rest of the sleeve. So that means you're working flat for the sleeve cap and working in the round for the sleeve. And the difference in gauge between working flat and working in the round is really what's driving my fit issues here. So when I first swatched for this project, I swatched in the round because the majority of this project is knit in the round from, the underarm down, as well as the sleeves. You really only have the upper body portion worked flat. So in the time that I was working this upper body portion flat, this was last year, and I didn't have any gauge differences between working in the round and working flat. I know that sometimes this is an issue for me where I will have gauge differences between working flat and in the round. It kind of depends on the yarn that I'm using, the needles that I'm using, but for this yarn, I didn't have that issue. So when I came back to it this year, I was not expecting to have any issues when I began this sleeve over here, and lo and behold, that was not the case. So I picked up for that sleeve cap, did all of my short row shaping, started working through my decreases for the sleeve, and decided, oh, I should probably try this on now that I have a good amount of the sleeve. And I was highly, highly disappointed with how the sleeve fit. So you can definitely see it here. There's just a lot of excess fabric here at the sleeve, and even more so at the back. There's just a ton of excess. And when you raise your arms here, yes, there is some excess on this side here, but you can see there's just these giant folds in the sleeve cap. So I was very disappointed in that, and that was when I remembered that sometimes I have gauge issues when working flat versus working in the round. So I got out my gauge ruler, and lo and behold, my gauge was wildly different than the rest of my gauge for the project, and also different than my gauge for the lower portion of the sleeve here. The gauge for this project is 26 stitches per 4 inches, or 6.5 stitches per inch, and the gauge that I was achieving here at the sleeve cap was 23 stitches per 4 inches, or 5.75 stitches per inch. So that's a huge difference that amounted to about 1.5 inches of width difference when you're thinking about the total circumference at the underarm, which is basically the width that you have when you're reaching the bottom of the sleeve cap. So there's just a ton of extra width that I don't need here in this sleeve cap that I have because of the gauge. So once I realized what was going on here, that it was a gauge issue, and this is an issue that I have from time to time, I knew what I was going to do to solve the problem. And that is to go down a couple of needle sizes from what I was using here to try it again on my second sleeve cap, to then compare the fit between the two and make sure that I felt good about the fit going forward. Again, as I said, I've knit this pattern several times before. Granted, I had not knit a long sleeve one, but it went through extensive preview knitting. My preview knitters had a great experience with it. So I was assuming that I was going to have a very similar experience that I had with knitting my short sleeve versions as I did with this long sleeve sleeve version. I am working this with a lace weight wool held with a lace weight mohair, so I know that fabric will react somewhat differently than just like a plain wool fingering weight sock yarn, but I was not expecting such wild differences. And knowing that there is a very big difference in the gauge of what it should be versus what it was, I was pretty sure that just solving the gauge issue was also going to solve my fit issue. So here's where the second sleeve comes in. This is the sleeve that I'm currently working on now that I kind of abandoned this one to check to see if this was indeed the issue. You can see that this sleeve is just so much cleaner than this one, and we can go ahead and do an up close comparison. I've repositioned my camera so you can see everything a little bit closer in and really get an idea of what is going on with the fit at these sleeve caps. So I'm trying to raise my arms here about as equally as I can, and you can see that there is like a little bit of excess here at the top, but not a ton, whereas on this side there's all of this extra fabric. After I measured the stitch gauge, I did not do a detailed row gauge comparison, but I would assume that in addition to the stitch gauge being too loose, I would assume the row gauge is too loose as well, leading to a sleeve cap that is too tall and leading to that excess fabric collapsing as I raise my arm and just kind of having a puff effect. And even when I have my arm down, you can really see that there's almost a small puff right along here as I transition from working flat in the sleeve cap to working around and again achieving the gauge that I should when working in around here. So you can definitely see that difference just with my arm down, and it just becomes more exaggerated as you move the arm up and down, and you can see that excess fabric just bunching everywhere. And for a little close-up, you can see how much excess there is both at the front and at the back here. And that's in comparison to this side over here. Again, there is a little bit of excess. It's not a super slim, exactly tailored sleeve. And there is a little bit of excess at the back, but it's kind of needed for mobility, especially for reaching forward, to make sure that I'm not feeling strained or too tight as I use my arms on a day-to-day basis. So there is a little bit of excess fabric there just for mobility's sake. So again, as I raise my arms here a little bit, you can really see the difference between the clean fitting sleeve cap over here and the very, very bunchy sleeve cap over here. So all I did to make this fix was going from using a US size 3 needle, which is what it's called for in the pattern, what I was achieving gauge with in the round and otherwise in prior years when I was knitting flat, to using a US 2 for the sleeve cap to achieve the gauge that I should be achieving for this pattern. So just by doing that and making sure I actually have the right gauge throughout the entire project, I've gone from having a really poor fitting sleeve over here that's bunching, that's almost falling off the shoulder over here, and generally just kind of looking sloppy and not what I was looking for, to having a really clean, nice fit that I actually want for this project. I hope this has been an informative little session here on how important gauge can be in the finished fit of your garment and whether you like that fit or don't, and how easy it is to make a correction when you realize you're having results that you're not happy with, especially when it's coming down to a gauge issue that's solvable just by changing your needle size. Having gauge differences between knitting and purling, and therefore knitting flat and knitting in the round, is pretty common, but there are easy solutions to correct these problems for you so you don't have issues with it, or if you do have issues, you're able to fix them as you realize that you're having the issue on a project. So this is just a cautionary tale to say, always be sure to check your gauge, both swatching and as you're going in your project. And once you've started in your project, it doesn't guarantee you that you're free from there on out, especially if there's a transfer between knitting flat and knitting in the round, or even changing stitch patterns. So be sure to check your gauge, compare it back to the pattern, because designers are calculating things like set-in sleeve caps that work really well when you meet gauge and don't work well at all when you're not meeting gauge. So it's really important to check throughout your project as you go and not panic if something does happen. You can always pull it out, reknit it, and end up with something you're still really happy with. Thank you for sticking around today. I hope you learned a little bit more about gauge. I would love to hear from you in the comments if you have had any project issues like I've had here today, where you had a gauge issue, and especially if you solved a gauge issue and what you did to do that. If you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to subscribe. I also host a podcast every couple of weeks where I share all about my knitting projects and designs, and I would love to see you there. Happy knitting, and see you next time.